Everything that's created in the world, everything that's created in creation, actually goes through 3 stages before it manifests. And in the metaphysics that come from the ancient Indian teachings, they talk about the causal universe, the astral universe, and the material universe. Causal is the level of ideas, astral is the level of energy, and the physical world is the material world that we see. Because the physical world is the biggest part of it, and that's the one that we're moving around in all the time. I mean, I'm on planes and cars, and we spend hours and hours moving from spot A to spot B, whatever it might be. We feel that this is the real thing that's happening. But if you actually stop and think about it, everything manifests in 3 stages, as I was saying. Before anything manifests, somebody has the idea for it. Isn't that so? And we have many, many ideas, but the only ones that manifest are the ones that we put energy into. I mean, I had most of my day was free today. I had a certain idea about some things that I was going to do. But when it came time, I decided not to put any energy into any of those ideas. And as a consequence, I accomplished none of them. They were all great ideas, every one of them, but they never manifest because I didn't put energy into them. So at any point in time, because this is an energy universe, even though we're living in what appears to be a material world, Einstein told us a while ago, Einstein perceived a while ago, because his revelation was a revelation first. First, he knew it was true. And then he spent many years figuring out how to communicate to everyone else that it was true with his whatever he did, mathematically or whatever the issues were. But first he just knew it. He saw that it was so, that what appears to be solid matter is just energy taking different forms. And then all the things that go with that, which energy doesn't go away, it just keeps changing its form like this. And this is what's happening to us now, is our whole global civilization is now being ruled by the concept of energy. Whereas up until this time, up until actually about 1900, these are ancient traditions of India about how these ages cycle through on a planet. This is just a physical aspect here. Now, I have to start by saying humanity is not getting better. But the society that inhabits this planet, which is only one of many inhabited planets, if we want to get really out there, but the civilization of this planet goes through higher and lower stages of refinement, of understanding. We're moving from an age in which fixed material realities were the only thing that people perceived into an age in which people are perceiving and then inventing, based on their perception, the subtlety of energy. And think, if you were born in 1900, you basically got around on a horse, or you walked, or maybe you had a dog cart or something like that, right? But from 1900, look what happened, is that we all figured out that there was all this other way to create energy. And then in more recent years, with all of the subtleties of the computers and the internet and all of these things, bear in mind, all of these things were always there to be perceived, but people didn't see it because they made inventions based on what was there, but they didn't invent the energy. They just began to direct it because our awareness as a planet is coming up right now. But the main point difference is now we understand energy as the primary reality of what we're doing. And this is why in the age of fixed form, races were separate, religions were separate, countries were separate, languages were separate, because form, physical things just look solid. You can't bang them together. You're just like this. And people are separate, even no matter how tightly you hug them. At a certain point, you have to let go, and you're separate like that. But now that we're understanding everything is energy and consciousness, the differences of form just don't seem so important to us anymore. However, simultaneously on this planet, there are a great many people who are very much opposed to letting go of form and beginning to relate only in terms of energy. And that is the incredible dichotomy that we're beginning, the oppositional forces, polarization, that we're beginning to see on our planet. Those who want form to be the definition of reality, my country, my money, my culture, my religion, my gender, whatever it might be, however you want to define it, my race. We want to stay separate, and over here we're saying, come on, really, just tune in just a little bit deeper, and you'll see that it's all just the power of spirit moving through us, but not spirit like my theology. The problem we have in English, which is a tough problem, is that we use the word God. And if you actually think about it, it has absolutely no meaning unless you have a theology that'll define it for you. You know, it's not an experiential word. By contrast, in the Sanskrit language, and I'm not talking about Hinduism, because Hinduism can be just as rigid as everybody can be rigid. But in the Sanskrit language, there are countless words that are synonyms for the word God. And I'm not talking about the deities. I'm not talking about Ganesha and, and all of that. But they're words like Prem, and Prem means divine love, or Ananda, which means infinite bliss, or Shanti, which means peace. And all of those words, we at least have some idea what those words mean, don't we? We tend to define them in terms of our experience. Peace means, oh my gosh, the baby finally stopped crying and went to sleep. No, that's not Shanti. That's just a lucky moment, okay? Which you should take advantage of until the baby wakes up again. But it's what Jesus used the word, in the Bible at least, they translate it, the peace that passeth understanding, because they didn't know the word Ananda. They might have had a good Hebrew word, but by the time it got to an Aramaic word, but by the time it got to us, they're trying to speak of that. And St. John speaks of perfect love, which casts out all fear. So he's coming closer to the word Prem, because what kind of love could cast out all fear? It has to be the kind of love that transcends anything that can frighten you. And what could possibly be powerful enough to transcend anything that could frighten you? It would have to be infinite. It would have to be eternal. It would have to be divine. So what we're trying to have happen, or I should say what the divine is trying to have happen, and what this change of energy that we're moving into is basically to live up to what science is telling us. If it's all energy, it's all just energy changing form all the time, it gives us a completely different perspective on why am I here? What is success? How should I function? What can I do to not suffer and to have more joy? We've been trying to accumulate and control the material world, but the material world is the last step. It's the ideas and the energy that really determine what's going to happen here. And when you think of ideas and energy coming before manifestation, you realize that by the time something is manifested, it's in the last stage. It's at the end of the cycle. And already, whatever is already here is being pushed out by what's coming. And one of the many things that Yogananda writes in this book and spoke about is just this fact that we're all having to learn now a whole new way to operate. And the implications of this, we're only just beginning to understand. We are living in very uncertain times. So what do we do in response to it? Where is the solution? And the uncertain times are created because of this conflict. I mean, this is common sense at this point. It's also a global prediction that Yogananda made, that Mother Mary in Medjugorje has said, that Mother Mary in Fatima has spoken of, that Padre Pio in Italy, that visionaries in Venezuela, everywhere you turn, people with expanded sight can see this story that's building. And the story that is building is the promise of ever-increasing conflict until the conflict reaches a crescendo, and then we get to really go forward. Population of the world divides up like a big fat cigar. You know, it's skinny at the end and really fat in the middle. And most people just hang out in the middle of it. You know, you're not really terrible and you're not really good. You're just kind of there. And there's a few really bad people and a few really good people. But you can go along for a long time and just kind of be in the middle. Just follow your own business. Right now, the middle is just disappearing. And because all the energy is like this fierce fight to turn the clock back and make the future look like the past. That's basically what they're trying to do. And then on this side, we have all these people who say, wait a minute, we have accustomed ourselves to an energy concept of the universe. Even if we don't know it, we just intuitively can feel that this is out of balance. But this is not a passive, this is not a passive moment. Now, therefore, do we go out on the streets and demonstrate? Do we get people to vote? I mean, I know what the choices are in the USA. It's probably similar here. How much do we work to force that opinion onto the world? And how much effect would we have for doing that? And this is where the prophecies of these great masters at least become interesting. And the stories of these ancient cycles of higher and lower ages on planet become relevant, because we are the ideas that we're putting energy into that are going to manifest in a new reality. And we see it all around us. And that's what I was saying from travel. I see it everywhere. And there's a real war going on. There's a war of ideas. It's happening here, and it's happening on the astral and also on the causal plane. When we leave our physical bodies, we go to the astral plane, which is we don't have a physical form, but our consciousness is still present. This is what all the near-death experiences are telling us. You know, when you die, you don't actually die. You don't actually go anywhere. You do step out of this body, and now we have all the movies showing you what it's like, and we have all the near-death experiences. But people are discovering that death is just what Jesus said, walking from one room to another. But we don't walk into eternity of heaven with angels and harps. We just live on that dimension for a while until we need to have a physical experience again. And let me explain that a little bit too. Life has a purpose. And it's Jesus put it, I often just quote from the Bible, be ye therefore perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect, he said. If thine eye be single, thy body will be full of light. Jesus was living in a time when he had to hint. He couldn't speak explicitly. Yogananda incarnates in a time when he can speak explicitly. But they're saying the same thing. Jesus saying, be ye therefore perfect, was not like, oh, randomly if you have nothing else to do. He was really telling us that this is why we're here. And Yogananda comes and very explicitly lays it out, and then he tells you how. He teaches meditation, he teaches right attitude, he brings the ancient scriptures of India, where India is the only continuous civilization on this planet. Every other great civilization has risen and fallen, and on the same landmass, you have a completely new culture. India's culture has been continuous, as far as anybody knows. Yoga, they have evidence that yoga postures, are people meditating in exactly the same way that we're being taught now. They find carvings 5,000 years old. And how old was it when it was carved 5,000 years ago? Because human beings are always the same, you know. But we go and we carry the purpose of human life is ever increasing awareness. And that's a really interesting way to think about it. Think about it even as children. What happens to children? They increase their awareness. You know, they don't know how numbers work, and they find out how numbers work. They don't know how language works, and they find out how language works. The Suzuki violin method that teaches little children to play the violin, the man's, he was Japanese, and it occurred to him, and this is how he put it, even little children can speak the very difficult Japanese language, he said. And if they can learn the difficult Japanese language, they can learn to play the violin. But the children don't invent it, they just become aware of how it works, isn't it? And they become aware of words. They begin to understand how to use them. They become aware of friendship. They learn that if I hit my little brother with my truck, he's going to come at me, with a rock. And so these are facts that you become aware of. Then we become an adult, so-called. Our bodies reach the point where this is it. And then, it crests and then it begins to decline. But as we improve, even as adults, we become aware, don't we? We become aware of, wow, this experience I had as a child has really molded my way of thinking. And then we become aware that my thinking is distorted. Now, our thinking was always distorted by that experience, but we didn't know it. Right. And we discover that we have a talent for certain things. I used to think I had no talent for visual harmony, for visual art. I'm not a painter or anything like that. But I was working on helping to publish a book, and I had told everyone that I had no talent for visual art, and then they started telling me that I had no talent for it. But I realized I could see it better than the people who were telling me that I had simply told them I wasn't any good at it, and they believed me, which was a bad idea. I don't recommend it. But I just became aware of the fact that, in fact, I had a very highly developed sense of visual harmony. It was always there, but I didn't know it. Okay, so every time, think about this, every time you have become aware of something that was always true, but you were confused, how many more things are there that you could become aware of? What is the end point of that? And this is what the saints and masters challenge us with. This is what Swami Kriyananda presented to me in 1969. He was a very natural, he related to us in a very natural way. There were no accoutrements of being the leader or the spiritual leader. He didn't wear funny clothes. I mean, he wore sometimes Indian clothes, but he just behaved like anybody else. He was marvelously fun, but he was totally different. I don't know how else to say it. Because his consciousness was something else. He manifested over and over again, just speaking for myself. He always understood me. And I knew him very closely for 45 years. And there wasn't one incident where he didn't intuitively know me. And because of him knowing me, I got to know myself. I mean, he just knew things about me that I didn't know. And I don't mean like mysteries or secrets. He just understood like that. He was aware of things. And because of that, seeing that potential, I am infinitely more aware than I used to be. What is the limit of that? Be you therefore perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect? That's exactly what Jesus was saying. And the single eye is the spiritual eye that we meditate on. That, whenever we feel inspired, we always look up. Nobody says, I feel really inspired. I think God is telling me. You just automatically, even when you sort of lose your thought for a minute, you think it's somewhere out there. Because we somehow, and it's not that it is up there, but all of our language, everything that's positive is upward. I feel uplifted. I feel on top of the world. Even I feel as high as a kite. Not referring to substances. Just that's, and then we say, I feel downcast. I feel depressed. We do this all the time because that's how the energy actually flows. And then you get the esoteric side of it from the metaphysics of India, speaking of the spiritual eye, where these two eyes, you begin to look upward and outward. It's not really that you're looking backward and cross-eyed, but it's more like the sun is rising. If you're watching the hill, waiting for the sun to come over it, your eyes automatically go up in that way, don't they? And among the reasons why watching the sunrise come out from behind a mountain is so uplifting is because we have naturally assumed the meditation posture. And it begins to pull all of our energy up into a positive direction. Because we are just this field of energy. And that field of energy is constantly being affected by every thought, action, and feeling that you have. Because energy doesn't go away. When you put out all this energy, it doesn't just dissipate and go down the drain. It just takes that form. And because we identify with what we do, it sticks with us. Everything that we do affirms what we believe to be reality. And we affirm it in terms of what we think is going to make us happy and what's going to cause us to suffer. I use as an example, I can talk very philosophically about dying, and I have no conscious fear of death in the sense that I don't worry about it. I'm also of an age where I've done a lot of what I came here to do, but I've never really been afraid. I believe in God. I believe in the continuation of consciousness. If I die, I die. Nonetheless, I have a lot of energy in me that still is protective of its body and is nervous and doesn't just say, okay, Lord, whatever you want. We had a big earthquake many years ago, in 1989, where I live. The building began to shake, really began to shake. And I perceived that being inside a shaking building was not a good idea. So I ran out of the shaking building, but I ran screaming out of the shaking building, just completely gone. And some of my friends says, oh, they just walked out saying, Lord, Lord, whatever you want. I said, whoa, not me. Because in that moment, I forgot it all. I'm not proud of it, but that's what happened. So we're constantly creating a pattern of energy based on what we believe is true. But we are not aware of vast levels of truth because we just are not aware of it. Look backwards, see, we have, and that's what your karma is. Your karma is everything that you don't yet understand about the nature of reality, which is why we say Jesus, Yogananda, Buddha, Krishna, you can say they had no karma because they understood everything about the nature of reality. And that's why Jesus could turn the water into wine. That's why he could raise the dead. That's why he could heal the blind, because he understood that it was all just energy that could be influenced by the power of consciousness, love, thought, and he could just take that energy and put it in another form. I mean, metaphysics and physics have just married in our time, and it's become the same thing. But we need experiences in order to learn lessons that we don't already know about reality. That's the point. And that is the whole drama. The drama is not that this planet's going to get perfect or that humanity in some abstract form is going to go up and we're just going to ride the bus and become more and more enlightened. That's not how it happens. What's going on this physically inhabited planet and all the other physically inhabited planets, individual souls are being born by choice, by conscious choice of our higher self, into a situation that will give us the best chance to learn, the best chance to wake up. So we're in the astral world. We rest. The astral world is a bit of a rest. We learn. We sort of gather our forces up again. And depending how refined, how aware you are, you meet people in the physical world who they have no subtle consciousness. They're just physical. They live in their physical bodies. Everything is a physical pleasure. They don't have any sense of past or future. I'm not condemning. It's just a mere fact. We're very different. People who have an awareness even that a subtle realm exists, that have more refined tastes, that are responding to the vibrations of things and not just the physicality of them, we're more awake in the astral world because we can enjoy a non-physical vibration. Others go to more plainer places, or they even just sleep right through it until we're ready to continue with school. It's like a summer break. It's like we get 3 months off, or maybe 100 years, whatever it might be. We get a little bit of a break, and then we have to come back. And so we very carefully choose with our consciousness to be born into the race, the culture, the country, whatever it might be. And we choose a planet that is having an experience that will benefit us. Now, that's quite different than choosing a planet that will have an experience that we will enjoy. Because once we get identified with this body again, we have a very definite way of saying what's good and what's bad. What's good is what makes me feel good without my having to put out any effort, isn't it? Ease and pleasure. And when people talk about karma, good karma is easy and pleasurable. Bad karma is challenging and difficult. Isn't that how people use it? But it depends on what your objective is. If your objective is to sleep through yet one more incarnation, easy and pleasurable that's just fine, because you're just going to stay in the second grade for another year, and then we'll just go rest in the astral world and come back to second grade and we'll try again. But if we really want to, and this is also what's important, every time we become more aware, we become more in command of ourselves, don't we? And all of a sudden we are more able to choose, to make those decisions that will really lessen our suffering and increase our happiness. Every single decision you make is based on that. It's really fun to look at your life. Many of the decisions we make are unspeakably stupid, just breathtakingly stupid, but we don't know it at the time. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had to say that to myself, but it's like, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I wasn't aware. But then when you become aware, you never make that mistake again. You become more elevated. That's where we're going. So we looked at this planet. We said, whoa, this is a planet that's transitioning from matter into energy, and that is a tumultuous time. And I can get to face a lot of my fears, and I can potentially learn about perfect love, which casts out all fears, which is not just loving your fellow man, but is knowing myself to be part of the divine love that is always there. Is that an easy assignment? No. But incarnating here at this time seemed like a good idea at the time. And that's why we did it. Because there's a lot to scare us here. And here's the other part, which is also annoying, but there's nothing we can do about it. One of the principles of divine love is that divine love is equal, and that all of Divine Mother's children are equally dear to her. And that all of us are on the same journey, and everybody needs their opportunity to try out our theories about what brings happiness and what brings suffering. One of the characteristics of this stage is that we have all these different realities going on at the same time, and they are trying out their theories about what's going to make them happy, because they're not aware of many of the things that we're aware of. And they will learn, and they will learn usually probably the same way we learned, by seeing the consequences of their own actions, by seeing the consequences of their own opinions, except it takes more than one incarnation. None of this makes any sense if you think we're just born and we die and that's the story, because justice is not served. Good people end up losing and bad people often win if you just go like that. This is what I was saying, Swami Kriyananda's awareness. I saw what the camera would see. You put the camera there and all this is going on around it, but the camera just sees this. But if you're not glued to the camera and you stand back, you see the whole panorama, which is to say all the actions that built you up to this point and where you're going to go as a consequence of what you're doing now, which changes everything you feel. But we're here, first above all, we're here to face our own fears and our own limitations, and to understand more about our oneness with all reality and what the divine really is. And I'm here because it scares me. It's very simple. It scares me. And how am I ever going to not learn to not be afraid? I'm not going to learn to not be afraid by sitting in my room reading books about not being afraid. I have to be able to actually stand here. And, speaking from all the years that I've been working with this, I'm much less afraid than I used to be. Much less. And so, once again, how much more is there in front of me? So apparently in the astral world, I wanted to be here for this great adventure. And then, of course, one of the ways that we become more joyous and happy is when we help others. Isn't that so? So we're needed right now, but we're not needed in some big dramatic way, because that's not really how change happens. The real power is the power of consciousness and the power of thought. And somebody was using the phrase power versus force, which I recall was a book or something that somebody wrote. The material has force, but the spiritual has power, because we are the future. And the future is moving that way. So our job is really simple, which is we need to understand what the real purpose of my life is. We have to develop the self-honesty and the humility to understand who I really am, what is the next step for me, and then to become very conscientious about moving in that direction. Being angry at the politicians, being outraged about what people are doing, trying to force our will on others. I don't think that's going to bring us what we really want. Do we really want a world in which people are angry with each other and are trying to force each other? Even if, of course, I'm right. It doesn't really matter because the vibration I'm putting out is not the vibration I'm trying to create. And so we don't have a lot of margin now. My dear friend, this beautiful, sweet friend of mine, her name was Paula. She died of cancer. She had cancer 3 times. She died relatively young of cancer, but she was really one of the sweetest, most saintly people I knew. So she died very consciously. We had a 3-day party in the hospital, which was her last 3 days. Paula's passing party, we called it. She said to me when she had the 2nd or 3rd round, she said, I just don't have the luxury of having a single negative thought. That's what she said to me. That was a really interesting phrase, isn't it? I don't have the luxury. In other words, I can't indulge this side of myself anymore. And that's really what we have to work with. We have to make a resolution that the party's over. There's too much at stake. We need to be really conscientious about putting out the right vibrations now and having the right thoughts and the right actions. Don't misunderstand me. This does not mean we become really nice because, I use Jesus because we're most familiar with Jesus. Jesus picked up the whip and drove the money changers out of the temple. I don't think he was being a good boy when he did that, He was using the power that was in him to correct a wrong. But he was not touched by it. It was just not right. So our principle has to be that we have to stand by what we understand to be true, truth as we understand it. And it's directional because we're moving towards something, but we can only move as fast as we can move. So you can't just say, this is what I'm going to live by. But we have to stand where we are and be just a little better than our worst. I know that doesn't sound like much. If you make a principle to always be a little better than your worst, you will find that your life will actually transform. Because that means every time you stop and think, who am I really? And how can I just be a little better? How can I put out a little more kindness, a little more energy, or a little more courage? Because sometimes, as I say, you just have to stand up and fold your arms and say, no, I'm not going to allow that. Not in my house. There were some friends in my house, and they were saying, they were criticizing in a way that I just couldn't accept. And I just said, either you stop or you leave. I will not have anybody in my house talk like that. And they were a little chagrined because they had let themselves get into it and they stopped. But I would not put up with it, period. So your best entirely depends on which way is upward for you. But that's what we all have to do. We have to get a clear idea of what the ideals that we're living for. We have to become realistic about my own next step. The thing that happens is we think, oh, now the idea is to be God realized, now it's to be in perfect joy. I'm going to go to a weekend seminar and on Monday I'll be there. No such luck, okay? This is a very long, you move like this. But if you do that and keep doing it, gradually you just look back. See, I've lived long enough now. When I was in my mid-20s and I just started this, the group of friends I was with in community, I said, we saw the beautiful island out there and we just dove into the water and we've been swimming and swimming, but it's a little farther away than we thought it was, and it just keeps, and so now we're sort of all treading water talking about it, because we've left the shore, it's pretty far behind us, the goal is not in front of us. We haven't reached it yet, I mean. The goal is still in front of us. So it's be realistic. But every time you're just a little brighter, a little more of an instrument, a little clearer, a little more determined, just keep that up. And they will play out their story. Yogananda spoke of serious conflict, serious war, serious planetary change, serious economic change. But the purpose of it, is to wake us up. I think when this whole cycle is over, those of us who are left, or from the astral world, we'll just say to each other, what were we thinking? What a crazy world we built for ourselves. But if we keep putting in this story of light, compassion, kindness, understanding, courage, commitment, it'll all be different. That's what's needed for us. So we were born for this time.